I've looked into scores of cases, and though not everyone's innocent, of course, many are. After 9/11, the Americans went trawling for suspicious Muslims in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Africa, or even Europe. Often they paid money for prisoners. They presumed their captives guilty, and then subjected them to the most appalling treatment. I'm in Jordan. I'm here to talk to a man who's been abused by the Americans. Hussein, a Palestinian refugee, was running a yogurt stand in Kabul. When the war came, he fled to Pakistan for the safety of his family. He was sold to the Americans and held in Bagram Air Force Base for a year before being taken to Guantanamo. After almost 3 years in custody with no indication of what he might have done wrong, he was released without charge or apology. I've come here to get an affidavit of the abuse that he suffered.
So, going back to the worst thing in Bagram, I want to make sure it's accurate that, he had his sort of face on the ground, and then they used a stick, and I want to know why they did that, why they said they did that, why he thought he did that, what harm he suffered, and it totally humiliating it. Okay, and then they took some sort of stick and stuck it up his rectum.
Yes.
And, I'm sorry to do this, but can you describe the pain?
فيك تقولنا قد ايه كان الوجع؟
الوجع متألم جدا بحيث انه يعني الانسان يمكن الرجل يؤذى لكن لا يصل.
He believes that a person does not, or he's not a person that screams out or would scream if he wasn't really hurt, and only when the pain is overwhelming, past the threshold point, would he scream, and he certainly did scream. He screamed as loud as he could.
As we began with his statement, the first things that happened to him, there was some debate over, is that torture? Is someone making someone stand for hours on end with their arms above their head or whatever? Is that sort of thing torture or not? To me it clearly is. What's the point of doing it unless you're trying to torture someone? But as we got past that, past the sleep deprivation, into ramming some sort of broomstick up his rectum, I don't think there's any sane person who wouldn't call that torture. The question of it all is why. From the very beginning it seems that Hussein didn't have anything to say. They didn't even bother to interrogate him in Guantanamo for 10 months. And so what on earth were they doing? First seizing him, second holding him, and third torturing him. Absolutely disgusting.
How can America have come to this? This wasn't a one-off, but a systematic policy. We know from a series of leaked memos that torture was discussed at the highest levels of US government. The Justice Department took the US legal definition of torture and cynically redefined it so they could say it wasn't happening. They said that suffering at the hands of American troops would only count as torture if physical pain was equivalent to organ failure or even death. According to them, nothing less counted. Donald Rumsfeld specifically authorized torture light to soften detainees up for interrogation. But in Bagram and Abu Ghraib, torture light soon escalated into torture heavy. Even our own soldiers abused prisoners in Iraq. Their defense? We were only following orders. It's a situation that many in the military themselves deplore. Charlie Swift is a senior U.S. Navy officer and the military lawyer detailed to represent one of the Guantanamo prisoners charged with conspiracy to commit terrorist acts.
What's his name?
Salam Ahmed Hamdan. He's a friendly guy, a trusting guy, is not capable of hate. He doesn't really hate his guards.
Let me ask you about that, because I understand he has some reasons to hate. What are the worst sorts of things he had to go through?
Well, he was treated very badly at the beginning. While in Afghanistan, he alleges, and I wasn't there, but this is what Mr. Hamdan tells.
Do you find him credible?
Yes, I do.
What sort of things does he allege?
He alleges he was beaten, that he was held for about 3 days in a bound position, cold, dropped, dragged, kicked, punched. 2 prisoners had been beaten to death and died during their interrogations. Everyone in the prison camp knew about it, decided, hey, not for me. I'll tell them anything they want to hear, because nothing in this is worth dying for.
The Americans then proposed to use these confessions tortured from Charlie's client as justification to detain him indefinitely. They were convinced he was Osama bin Laden's driver and gave him no chance to plead that he was innocent of any terrorist conspiracies.
So he was just meant to plead guilty?
Right. He was told, well, here's your choices. You can plead guilty and have a lawyer, or if you don't plead guilty, then we'll take your lawyer away.
Were you told that you
Yes.
had to help him plead guilty? How do you feel about that?
I thought that it was unethical. When I met him, I realized very quickly that he didn't feel that he'd committed a crime, and that he didn't want to plead guilty. And I was really fairly shocked that the government wanted to try him at all.
It's all too easy to see how innocent men got caught in the net. The Americans were offering substantial bounties for anyone in Afghanistan or Pakistan who turned in a foreign terrorist. Locals began to scoop up Arabs, handing them over with assurances to the US that they were Al-Qaeda members. Salam Hamdan was captured in this way by an armed gang.
Mr. Hamdan alleged when he asked, why are you stopping me? If you grabbed me, they said, well, you're worth money to the CIA.
How much money would the CIA?
$5,000. And Hamdan's reaction when he hears that they've sold him for $5,000 isn't even anger, it's amazement. He says, I've never seen that much money. Can you show it to us?
So money changed hands in Afghanistan, and you'd think that would make the Americans cautious. Instead, they assume all the prisoners are guilty, force them to confess, and by the time they reach Guantanamo, everyone's a lethal terrorist.
I don't think these are very nice people. They're bad individuals.
You know, if you went to New York and you asked them, they'd probably be saying we're treating them too good.
After 3 years of suffering daily indignity and brutality as prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, my clients Mozambique and Richard Belmar were finally released without charges just a few weeks ago. I'm on my way to see Richard, who was only 21 when he was sold to the US forces in Pakistan. He had been to Afghanistan, but that's not a crime. He wanted to study the Quran. Because of the extended torture he's been through, Richard's badly traumatized. He's still in hiding, and he's frightened to show his face.
Richard, it's really good to be in your house back in England after seeing you in Guantanamo Bay. But thinking all that way back, do you have any recollection of the sorts of things that the Americans would say to you when they were beating you?
Yeah, I remember them saying things like, one less Muslim on the street, Muslim terrorists, this is for 9/11, stuff like this.
Is there any sort of physical evidence of you being abused by them?
Yeah, I have a fracture on my head, on the back of my skull.
Where is that? That's back here someplace?
Yeah, it's right there.
Mm-hmm. And what happens when you put a little pressure on that?
So when I put pressure on it, I black out.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's a bad injury, basically.
Getting a fractured skull, was that the worst thing that happened to you?
No, it's not.
What
The worst thing that happened to me, I can't even explain because it's too horrific. I can't handle it, to speak on it.
This torture was meted out in order to get Richard to confess that he went to Afghanistan to sign up at a terrorist training camp.
Are you a terrorist? Were you a terrorist?
No, I'm not, and I never was.
What sorts of things were they trying to get you to say?
They're trying to get me to say, you know, that I trained in Al Fruit camp and that I had a cozy chat with Bin Laden and that I fought against America and stuff like that.
I mean, did you do it?
No, I didn't. It's far from the reality.
The reality is that the US had little on Richard except for confessions tortured out of him. Richard's lost 3 years of his life, suffers epileptic fits because of his skull injury, and has other deep emotional scars. When the US makes its case for torture, they call it coercion of course, They talk about terrorist masterminds who have information that will save lives. But that's not the sordid reality of Guantanamo Bay, where more often we're talking about yogurt sellers, chauffeurs, and kids like Richard, who were caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. So why is it that the United States continues to believe everything it hears? It's because the torturer doesn't get the truth, but gets what he wants to hear from the person he's abusing.